This is the talk of Music City Real Estate.
Welcome back to another episode of the Talk of Music City Real Estate,
where we educate and motivate all things real estate.
My name is Monty Moore with Realty One Group Music City.
Hey, and I'm Carey Ann with CMG Financial and my mortgage team.
Every week we'll be posting a new episode chock full of Nashville real estate value.
Yes, and you can follow along and subscribe at talkmusiccity.com.
If you've got a question for us, ask away at questions at talkmusiccity.com.
Monty.
Carey Ann, good to see your smiling face today.
Look who is here with us. You guys are all like color coordinated today.
This is the third time
I
in 2
I swear
weeks.
you call each other in the morning, don't you?
Oh,
We walked into a listing appointment the other day, and
Yesterday,
the same thing. Last week,
same
You know,
thing.
Lindsay and I do that all the time. So you become one
You're so
when
in
you're
sync,
when you
you're
when you
so in sync.
work together so closely. So I'm excited
So
that you're
Blake
back
Johnson.
in
Blake Johnson,
the
good to see you,
studio
brother.
with us today, Blake.
Yes.
happy to be here.
So I asked Blake to join us today, Carey Ann, because we recently had a situation with a 95-year-old client of a longtime client of mine. So I helped he and his recently deceased wife buy and sell about, 6, 7, 8 years ago, something like that. And we had a real tough situation happen because the buyer. Well, I'll let Blake tell the story, but I think that every agent can benefit by this understanding the story and being prepared for it, because we have seen, as an industry, we've seen over 40,000 people in the first month of the change of market walk away from their transaction, just walk away. And we're hearing things like, well, he's going to share with you about what lenders are being asked to do to help kill those deals. And that breaks my heart, when, especially in this case, because you've got a 95-year-old man who has totally put his trust in Blake and I. And, his wife just died a few months ago, and all this stuff is happening. They're trying to sell the place and get rid of stuff. And all this stuff, he's overwhelmed. And yet it didn't change the buyer's attitude as far as just flippantly just going to walk away from the whole transaction.
Right.
For some
makes
petty-
it very difficult.
petty
It's quite
reason.
an emotional roller coaster. I think
heartbreaking.
whether it's in this market or previous markets, I just think anytime where you feel confident in the idea that you are selling, all your belongings are packed up. And that was a feat in itself just to do, if you've ever gone through that process, to then find out maybe it's not closing, at the last minute. So interesting to hear the story that you've got.
Yeah, it's not like we're still not completely out of the woods here, but there's a lot of lessons that I think we've learned. Going into it, we sold the house. It ended up having multiple offers on it. The buyer who ended up prevailing was they were with one of the not so good national lenders, and we convinced them to switch to a local lender, which they did. They went to a local bank where the buyer has
We made that part of the deal.
we made that part of the deal.
We recommended you, but
I'm actually glad you didn't, that they didn't work with us,
Yeah,
because
well,
I
and
wouldn't
you'll
have
know
provided what would happen.
Oh boy. And they came in with a really kind of asinine number from an earnest money perspective. It was a $300,000 purchase. They came in, I think, with like $500 or maybe $1,000. So we made our counter offer contingent on one, being able to get approved with a local lender, which they did, and increasing their earnest money to at least 1% of their the purchase price. It was just hunky-dory. They came in the day before the open house. They came back the day of open house. They wanted this home. And we ultimately went with this offer, which was about, I think it was $10,000 or $15,000 less than the next offer.
Sure.
Because we realized that this was going to be a pretty done deal, at least what we thought. Get about 2 weeks into the contract, they scheduled Home Depot to get there, meet the seller, and measure for all hardwood. And what we didn't know, unbeknownst to us, was the buyer also showed up. And our seller, being the 95-year-old gentleman that he is, and we say all what Monty just said about the backstory. His wife just passed away. So his wife just passed away, and she had hearing aids, and his hearing aids stopped working. So what he started doing, because he thought this is a great idea, was just take her hearing aids and put them in his ears. Well, they don't fit and they hurt his ears. So oftentimes he just takes them out and leaves them somewhere. So he couldn't hear Home Depot knocking on the door.
So he doesn't answer the door.
He doesn't answer the door,
Okay.
and the buyer gets pissed off and
Or upset. Either word.
or upset. But I saw the text messages and I heard the voicemails. This was erring on the side of pissed off, and she called her agent, and she just said, "Yeah, pretty much." Called her agent and said, "I don't want this house anymore." And her agent's like, "Well, I didn't know that she was going to show up. I didn't know she was going to show up. If she just were to call me or were to call..."
So basically, she was upset that her schedule was off kilter.
Off kilter.
Sure.
She wasn't able to get into the home.
Okay.
But if she would have called either of us, we would have been able to get her in the house. So she was using that as an excuse to no longer want to purchase or proceed with the purchase of the home. And it's pulling out all these reasons as to why she no longer wants to purchase the home. And
Which we're hearing more and more nowadays, right? There's a lot of emotion in this industry right now. So, we're multiple reasons of why we're not moving forward with contracts. So it's because Home Depot could not get into the home.
That was
the reason.
That was a surface level excuse.
Okay.
I wasn't going to take that for what it was. So immediately I called my attorney and I, read him through the entire.
This was we were like 2 or 3 weeks into it, and we were only about 10 days or 2 weeks away from the closing date.
Okay.
Right. So we're nearing the end. Called my attorney, brought him up to speed, and he said, "Yeah, this is obviously, for obvious reasons, this isn't grounds to terminate a deal." So he put together a letter stipulating these are the reasons why you need to proceed with it, and if you don't, these are the damages that you would incur if you chose not to purchase the house, which obviously outweighed the purchase of the house. And we gave her 48 hours to respond, and it was a two-page letter, which anybody reading that would really kind of make you second guess your choices here. It's a great letter, but it served its purpose. So for about 24 hours, almost 48 hours, it was radio silent. We're trying to figure out, okay, well, if she doesn't do this, what do we do? Simultaneously, we're trying to determine, okay, worst case scenario here, we just relist it again. We'll probably sell it for more.
In the meantime, of course, our seller has got to make plans. He's got things in motion. He's committing to a next place, which requires 50% down. It's a hard date. I mean, everything's in place, and not to mention the pressure and so forth that he's starting to feel now, because we finally did have to. We waited a couple of days trying to think, well, she's surely going to come around, and she didn't, and so we had to have a heart-to-heart with him.
Do you think before, I'm going to just backpedal, so is it a situation when you're in that placement, before calling the attorney and getting letters, is there a heart-to-heart? I assume the buyer's agent tried to work and navigate through, because there's triggers, but that's not the trigger.
Well,
why
the
she's
attorney,
not buying.
he jumped forward a little bit, probably on the attorney part of it. There was efforts made before.
Efforts, so first start with the effort, please.
The buyer's agent called me in tears. I mean, this is. I hope this is not a reflection of me. I hope it's not a reflection of me. She just
great, because we want to make sure we show both sides.
Let me digress a little bit. I don't jump to litigious acts like that. I was
getting a little nervous about that.
Sorry.
Like,
watch out, Carey Ann. Watch out.
I'm going to sit over you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
On this side of the table.
No, she did everything that she possibly could to try and remedy it prior to calling me, right?
And that's what great real estate agents do, right? I mean, there's a lot of emotion right now in this business.
Right. And I mean, even so much, like there's so much humanity in there should be a little more humanity in transactions. But in this scenario, it's like he's 95 years old, right? Come on. Where's your compassion here?
Sure.
She was even trying to remedy the situation by like, he couldn't hear you. Here's the obituary of his dead wife who passed away like less than 2 months ago. Like, where's your compassion here? So she called me crying, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, well, what do we do? And immediately I'm like, okay, well, clearly the buyer's not going to budge, and we can't try to rectify this with just the emotional means. We have to bring in the contract.
Okay.
She obviously and clearly thought that she could just back away from this deal, and she
and then the other agent's comment about just get a denial letter, that didn't help matters any.
Well, and that's fast forwarding just a little bit. We put together a letter.
The letter was before that.
Letter was before that, and the agent. The agent indicated that she's just going to get her earnest money back. I was of the opinion that the agent thought that this was still a viable excuse to terminate a deal, And they were, that side of the transaction was still under the impression that, okay, we're just going to walk away from this, get all of our earnest money back, and just be happy-go-lucky.
Okay.
So that's when I brought up, okay, well, we'll be having conversations with our attorneys, and that kind of stunted her just a little bit. So we had the letter written. The letter was delivered. That was a Wednesday. We gave her till Friday at 5 p.m. to respond, and it was radio silence. Like we couldn't get a hold of the buyer. So we're trying to figure out what's the next step, because obviously worst case we're just going to relist it. And
Sure.
But one thing that the attorney referenced is like, even if he were to relist it, the original contract was $300,000. He relisted it, and let's say we sold it for $100,000. That difference is still technically considered damages against, and I'm in no way a lawyer. This is just what lawyers have told me. That difference is still considered damages that can be collected from the original buyer.
Okay.
So it's not just as easy as backing away from a transaction. So finally, there was a text that was exchanged from the buyer to the buyer's agent, which gave us the real reason why she didn't want to purchase the house. In her mind, she thought that the market has totally cooled. She was going to be purchasing the house, the condo, with a HELOC out of her existing house. And she thinks that because it has cooled, she can no longer qualify for a HELOC. She can no longer take that HELOC and purchase this condo. So she's making all these assumptions, right? All throughout this process, the local bank has been initiating whatever it took to get the HELOC, sending out the appraisals. And what we later learned is that she was kind of, either they didn't have the number right, or she was kind of dodging the local bank. I would venture to say there's maybe a little bit of a premeditated, like maybe she bought it and immediately had some kind of buyer's remorse.
Sure.
Right. But nonetheless, the letter ended up working. So she told us that, hey, I just don't think that I can afford the house anymore. Back and forth. But, the letter prevailed. She ended up purchasing the house. We had a inside track, purchasing the house, move forward with it. But the part that I really wanted to bring up, especially with you, Carey Ann, is when that buyer sent the text saying, I can no longer afford this house, I can no longer purchase this house, the buyer's agent immediately, within seconds, said, well, all you need to do is just call your lender and get them to issue a letter of denial or whatever, just deny you. And obviously that was concerning for more reasons than not. Up until this point, we had an inside track with the local bank. We knew the representatives who were approving. We knew the representatives who were underwriting. We knew all of those people. So up until this point, everything's been approved, and we trust the people on the inside at the bank. So
there's a Privacy Act, though, so we need to follow suit with that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
No information was.
We just want to make sure we're following suit with all the legal pieces.
Just checks and balances.
Yeah.
No details were exchanged, but that was the concerning aspect of, okay, not only is the buyer obligated to purchase the house per the contract that she signed and she executed, but now the agent is trying to act in the quote unquote best interest of her client, who's now determining, okay, well, I can no longer afford this house. How do I act? How do I get out of it? How do I get out of it? She's like, well, just get your lender to issue a letter of denial.
And I think that's really important to know, because, there is comfort, there's affordability or comfort, and then there's approval. There's two different things, right? And so we need to make sure that we understand that they can be approved, but just not comfortable for the approval, right? And so it's important that when you are working with a lender and or a listing agent, that you do review the document that you received, right? A pre-qual versus a pre-approval versus an underwriting approval, right? If I was a real estate agent, I would work really hard to get that underwriting approval, and then I would understand the true stipulations, because a pre-approval has a lot of stipulations, and a pre-qualifications has even more stipulations, which means possibly those two can easily be thrown out, and a denial can be issued. But yes, we as lenders do have a license, just like real estate agents, and we should not ever create something that is not a truthful document. I think that's where you were headed with the document. Again, the client doesn't feel comfortable does not mean that they're not approved for the loan.
Have you ever been asked that question?
Multiple times. Yeah, multiple times. And
so how do you answer it?
Well, because I stand straight as a professional within my career.
The question I'm referring to is what happened in this situation where the lender is being asked to deny somebody that's been approved, and there isn't new information that has changed their ability. It just circumstances that now have changed their heart, so that's what I want to make sure people understand, that there's been a lot of this happening, is why we really needed to address it as an industry, and we need to be mindful of that happening and do a few things along the way. One of them, of course, always make sure that you're connected to a quality lender who you don't have to worry about that, because in my opinion, and I know this is not what everybody's is, but if your lender is willing to do that, then I'd really question, the integrity of that lender. No offense to anybody using a lender like that or whatever. I get it, your buddies and all this stuff, and buddy's going to help somebody out. I get that, but to not give consideration to the lives involved that are going to be affected by that decision, to me, it feels like you're just flipping I'm speaking from the mortgage person's standpoint, you're just flipping your reputation, that it doesn't mean anything.
I think it's one license is not more important than the other. We all have state licenses, so it's really important that we follow through with that. Somebody that is younger and doesn't understand that, when I say younger, as in younger in their profession, and doesn't understand that, and they think they have years to go within their profession, may possibly say, "Oh, is that going to help you? Oh, I need your business, so I'm going to prepare that denial letter and find a reason to deny." Right? They didn't provide a bank statement, or they didn't provide that. And so again, is that walking in the gray area? Absolutely. We'll share. A lot of people reach out to me to do the 8-day closing, and so I remind people that you come to me to create solutions. You come to me to find approvals. So I do approve. I can't then just deny, right? You need to then go back to the previous lender that issued the denial, because I'm not that individual. But it is important to know. Now, I was once on the flip side. I was a seller who not only as a lender within the profession that I'm in, was also a seller. So I said, I want a commitment letter 10 days after contract. So I want to know that this is a done deal. I, as the seller, because I'm not going to move all of the furniture, et cetera, out. And so that happened. And there was talks, just like you. There was too much talking. Too many people knew that somebody could pay cash for this property. All the things, right? And we then, 2 days before closing, or hours before closing, I can't remember, we get a denial letter. Okay, after I moved all the furniture out. And so I, as somebody that felt like I wanted to stand up for all sellers, decided that I was going to hold the earnest money. And it was $10,000. And I was going to stand strong. And I feel like I was going to make a point, whether my point was I, as a seller, prevail, or I, as a seller, don't, win this situation. We're going on 3 years of back and forth. And this very wealthy person will not stand down and or stop the fight, to a point where they canceled one law firm to open up another, and it's continuing to continue. Wow. And we've gone through where they take your testimony, all the things. At the end of the day, what I realized through this transaction is a lot of attorneys don't understand all that goes on with getting a mortgage, all that goes on. They just know that you were approved and you were denied. Right. And I wanted to say, show me proof, and I don't know if you can do that or how it all works in the transaction. But I think the lesson of what we're trying to say is the rates are moving on a regular basis. A movement of a rate, could kick you out of qualification, which could kick you into a denial. So if you are a listing agent, I would go back to asking that lender not only for a true approval letter, right, with minimal conditions, so you know that it's all just waiting on the appraisal, but also confirm that loan has been locked, right, so that you know that approval is on a locked transaction. Right. Because THDA just raised the rate another quarter today. The market is shifting. We're probably going to see more movement, which means that if they were talking to lender A, who got them pre-approved 30 days ago, the whole landscape of what it is looking like today is totally different. Mm-hmm. And so yes, they were super excited on a price point point of 800,000, but they may not be comfortable paying 800,000 now on today's interest rates, right? Or vice versa. And so it's really important that you kind of double check through that. And also, nobody take advantage of anybody within the professions that we are in. We're all licensed, and so we should not be falsifying any documentation. If it's a denied loan, then let it be a denied loan and be stern in that. Now, I say I can send you a withdrawal letter that they withdraw their application, but that just means nothing, right? I mean, if you read it, it doesn't really mean much. So we've been asked multiple times as a manager and as a leader of a large group of loan officers, they're asked on a regular basis, and they call me to get guidance on what to do. And here's the deal: I can't send you a denial letter, and then you go find another house, and then I approve you. So if you get denied for financing, you're not going to be approved, down the street or just in a week from now, that kind of thing.
Please, so I'm begging you, okay, to my real estate peers out there, I'm begging you. Our reputation on this kind of stuff is being affected, okay, either right or wrong. Whenever I do a transaction with somebody, I said, look, Billy Bob, I know that you're representing your client, I'm representing mine, but let's do something even greater than that. For everybody's sake, let's represent the integrity of the entire transaction so that everybody walks away feeling like a winner. Because our reputation as an industry has been damaged over the decades, and that's why we see the iBuyers, that's why we see these other institutions coming to town, taking a big portion of our business, because we've allowed the consumer to feel like they overpaid for a bad experience. That breaks my heart. And it's these little things like this situation right now of, well, all they got to do is get a denial letter, and having that kind of flippant attitude. Damn it. Yeah. I don't want to ever be guilty of something. I know we're people pleasers. I get that. Yep. And we're connecting with our clients, and we're going to be their hero. And I'm, Blake and I are working with one right now that we're trying to get the yard done, trying to get the windows done, and the guy's totally dependent on everything that we do, and we're trying to be his hero. I get that, but let's be the hero of the transaction so that we're not hurting our reputation because of the future of our industry. Right. Look, guys, I've got almost 39 years of doing this. I'm concerned about the future if we all don't step up and do the next right thing. It's not complicated. Let's do the next right thing. The next right thing isn't flippantly killing a deal and not considering the aftermath for the other side of that transaction, okay?
And I was really proud of another transaction that happened where I was not party of it, but I was leading the loan officer and getting guidance, and they wanted a denial letter. And I shared that we cannot issue that because they are not denied. And so that was communicated to the buyer's agent. This was the buyer. And the buyer stood strong, in understanding that couldn't be the case. And so they shared other ways to possibly get out, and or just he was so determined to get his earnest money back that he then got an attorney to fight the buyer's agent and the lender to say that you do deserve to give me this denial letter. And she lost that transaction. The lender, right, the loan officer, ended up losing that relationship. But my thoughts were, we even offered to say the earnest money was $5,000. I cannot issue a denial letter, but I will give you $2,500 as a credit towards your next purchase, because we knew that they wanted to purchase. So we were trying to make all the things to try to make amends, and it ended up blowing up because of the determination of one wanting that to be denied and to get the full $5,000 back. And so there's a lot of emotions that go within these contracts. But again, these are contracts. A lot of people write contracts. You ask us to click a bunch of buttons, right? It's now it's just e-signed. It's a bunch of buttons. I think it's been so easy for us to sign documents now versus sitting down back in the day. Remember? Not so much you, remember? Back in the day. But I mean, we would sit down and I would have loan documents. It would be 25 pages of ink signed documents that we would need. That makes you feel more committed.
Absolutely.
Right? And more official when we had to sign those contracts. Now they're just clicking. And I don't know if we really truly understand as buyers the true commitment that we are doing.
Right.
And I think that's important that we educate the buyers and also educate that we can't just create a denial letter. And so on my transaction, they got denied, and then 30 days later ish, they bought $25,000 less, and they were approved for that, but not approved for my house. So, it's one of those situations where when you're at a certain price point, $25,000 doesn't move the needle enough to say you're approved or denied, right?
No,
and so that was not true. But what I realized through the process of me standing up for our real estate community, for the seller, is that it's a tough run. It's a tough battle there out there with the contracts how they're written today.
I think it's really important. Also, you said to help manage the expectations of the buyer in that process that you're making a commitment. I think it's really also equally, if not more so, important to help the seller manage their expectations.
Sure, yeah.
Because one of my biggest gripes about our TAR forms, our contract, is that it's written in the benefit of the buyer, not the seller. And damn it, if you've ever sat around a closing table, the seller is sitting here, and the moving truck is in the parking lot out here, and the attorneys got up for a minute and came back in and said to your clients, your sellers, say, "I'm sorry, but the loan was just denied." And they were there at the closing table. When you experience something like that, and the heartbreak of them knowing now they've got to go move their stuff back in there and lose the dream home and all. If you ever experienced that one time, you'll remember that there is two sides to this story. Okay, and so often, so many folks out there, especially the newer ones, have only worked with the buyer side. They haven't seen the aftermath of a deal gone south, at the last hour like that for the seller, and the heartache there.
I think the other part is as lenders, we want to work on giving you quality information, true information. So if the loan is approved, I want to be a woman of my word and follow that through, right?
Absolutely.
So if they were truly denied, it's because the lender, something happened there. But if it was a falsified denial, that's what makes it even worse. So we just need to stay true to our words and really double check ourselves. It is okay for you as a listing agent and as a buyer's agent to ask more questions. I find it quite interesting that more people don't ask me more questions. More agents don't ask me more questions. They take what is said to be true on this piece of paper, right? And you can ask a few more questions to know if they've done all the verifications, on a government loan, if they've locked a loan. These are not Privacy Act questions or yes or no questions. You're not digging into things a little too deep, which will really give you the confidence in regard to that transaction. So
Blake, I appreciate you sharing the story, and I think it's a reminder for all of us that we need to have a go-to attorney, not to jump out of the box on the attorney, but when you try the conversation, so forth, that the buyer is then reminded by something maybe a little more influential than our pleading, that, hey, you made a commitment here.
Right.
You made a commitment. The last thing you need to be doing right now with that commitment as you're trying to weasel out of it is get your damn earnest money back. That's not fair. I mean, when I see these offers written by agents who say, well, we want to make it contingent upon the sale of this home, and if it doesn't sell in time, then the buyers get their earnest money back. Well, the sellers are sitting there with their, teeth hanging out. I mean, come on, there's no ramifications if the buyers fulfill the obligation or not, and the seller should inherit all the risk. That's not fair. Come on, remember, guys, win-win. Let's work towards win-win, shall we?
Yes, good stuff.
Thanks, everybody.
Good stuff. Thanks for listening. You've been listening to the talk of Music City Real Estate.